Hello, welcome to Class Time, your daily classroom for CSEC and CAPE students. Our first lessons for today is CSEC Biology, and I am Jerome Wright. Today we'll be looking at movement and support. So let's get into it. So movement and support, and we want to go according to your syllabus. And our syllabus, we should be able to distinguish between growth movements in plants and animals, relate the structure of the skeleton to its function in humans, and discuss the importance of locomotion in animals. We also want you to be able to describe the mechanism of movement in a human forelimb. So before we go into the lesson, we want to differentiate on some terms that are used for this topic. And the two terms that we want to distinguish is, we want to look at the difference between movement and locomotion. Now, what do we mean by movement? A movement is just a displacement of part of an organism, while the entire organism remains stationary. So for example, I'm here waving my hand. Right? My entire body is stationary. My arms are just being displaced, so that's movement. Now, when we look at locomotion, now is the displacement of the entire organism from point A to point B. So I'm skipping, right? My entire body is changing location. That is locomotion. So movement, the body, entire body remains stationary. Part of it changes location, like waving my hand. Locomotion, entire body moves from point A to point B. So it's a displacement of the entire or whole organism from one place to the next. And so you have locomotion occurring in animals, and you have movement will occur in plants. Yes, plants can move. I know it might sound strange, but yes, plant does undergo movement, right? But they do not undergo locomotion. Now, what are some of the importance of locomotion? One, to find food. Plants do not need to undergo locomotion to find food because they make their own food by photosynthesis. Whilst us as animals, we have to go and hunt for food. Right? When I'm hungry, I can't go out and stand up in the sun and open my arms and get food. I have to go and prepare food. Also, to escape from predators. You know, no animals want to be eaten. Right? So in the jungle, predators coming, organisms need to get away. To look for a mate, plants don't need to locomote in order for reproduction to occur. Right? They have agents that does pollination. Right? But for us animals, we have to move in order to find mate, or locomote in order to find mate. Also to disperse offspring and to find favorable habitats, like the birds that migrate during hurricane seasons and so forth. So these are the reasons why, or the importance of locomotion in animals. Now, as I said before, plants does undergo movement, and we're going to see how plants actually does this. So plant movements include movement towards light, and you have opening and closing of flowers, growth of development roots, and movement of roots to find water, nutrients, etc. Now, plant movement can be classified into two types. And the first type is tropism, which is growth movement. All right? And this growth movement is, there's a potted plant on the window, and you see the potted plant moving towards the sunlight. So that is phototropism. So the plant is growing towards the light source. So that's a tropic movement. Right? Later on in the syllabus, when you look at irritability, we're going to look more on how the plant actually is able to grow towards the light source. So tropism involves growth movement, and this occurs in the stem and roots of plant. Our next type of movement is a non-growth movement, and this is called nastic movement. And this is, unlike tropism, it does not involve growth. Right? All it involves is the change in the turgidity of the cells. So for example, the mimosa species, or what we in Jamaica call the shame old lady. you touch the leaves and the leaves wilted. That's a form of nastic movement. Also, hibiscus tends to fold their leaves at night, and that is also a nastic movement. So it's a non-growth movement, unlike tropism, and the movement to the stimulus is not in direction to the stimulus, unlike phototropism and geotropism, where the plant grows towards the stimulus. In nastic movement, the movement is not determined by the direction of the stimulus. But as I said, when you do irritability, which is a topic that comes up in grade 11 biology, we'll go more into that. Now, locomotion and movement in animals is facilitated by two systems, the muscular system and the skeletal system, what we call the musculoskeletal system, so involve your muscles and your skeleton. So we're going to look at the skeletal system. But before we go into that, we want to let you be aware that there are different types of skeleton. You have the exoskeleton, and as the name suggests, exo means on the outside. So these organisms, their skeleton is on the outside, like they're insects. So they have the exoskeleton, which is made of chitin, is on the outside of the organism. So that's exoskeleton. Then we have hydrostatic skeleton, and this type of skeleton is found in like earthworms or soft-bodied animals, and their skeleton is formed by fluid-filled compartments within the body, and these fluid compressed against muscles and so help with movement. Now here comes what we have, endoskeleton. So exo means outside, endo means inside. So our skeleton is within our bodies, so you can't really see our skeleton. So endoskeleton consists of hard mineral structures located within soft tissues. So it's inside of the body of the organism, and that is the type of skeleton that we are going to look at going forward. Now, the skeleton has major roles in our bodies, and the first role is support. So our skeleton builds our framework, in which all the other body organs are supported by. So it helps to form our shape and posture and so forth. Protection. For example, your rib cage protects your lungs and your heart. Your cranium, which is found in the head, protects your brain. So your vertebral column, the spine that goes down, protects your spinal cord. So your skeleton helps with the protection of soft-bodied organs. Movement is also one of the functions of the human skeleton. Without the skeleton, we could not move. And movement is brought about when muscles contract and pull on the bones that are within our skeleton. The production of blood cells are produced in the bone marrow of our skeleton. And also, it is also a storage for minerals like your calcium and your phosphorus. So the human skeleton, movement, support, protection, production of blood cells, and the storage of minerals. So you can see that our skeleton has a lot of function. Now, you should know all the different parts of the human skeleton. And I told my students, and I'm telling you that it's good to get a picture of a skeleton, hang it up somewhere in your room, so you see it before you go to your bed at night, and when you wake up in the early morning, you are seeing it, because you need to know all the different bones of the human skeleton. So you need to know the major bones, the clavicle, humerus, the femur, the tarsals, and students normally mix the tarsals with the carpals. So you have to know the tarsals are found within your foot and the carpals within your hand. So do not mix up the two terms. So carpals, hand, carpal tunnel syndrome, hands, and tarsals, your feet. So you need to know the major bones of the human skeleton. The patella, same thing you call your kneecap. Your clavicle, called the collarbone. The scapula, your shoulder blade, radius and ulna. Right? So this you need to know. So get a diagram of the human skeleton, and in your spare time, you sit down and you go through the different parts, try to visualize it in your head, where the different bones are located. And so it may seem overwhelming now, but I can guarantee you, as soon as you get into it, you will know the different parts of the human skeleton. Now, the human skeleton can be divided into two parts. You have the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. And how do you differentiate the parts? As you can see in this diagram, which is color-coded, right, the axial skeleton is the main axis of the skeleton. So it consists of your cranium, your spinal cord, and your rib cage. Right? So it's the central axis of your skeleton. Cranium, spinal cord, rib cage, right, and your breastbone. Those form the axial skeleton, the central aspect of your skeleton. And then you have the appendicular, which branch off from the main axis. So you have your limbs, with your hands and your legs, as well as the girdles. Right? And the girdles in skeleton is those things that attach the limbs to the axial skeleton. That's what girdles in biology mean. Right? So you have the pectoral girdles, which connects your hands to the axial skeleton, and you have the pelvic girdle that connects your legs to the axial skeleton. And we're going to go into different parts as we move forward. So the pars skeleton, axial, and appendicular. All right, so we're going to start with the axial skeleton first, and the first thing we're going to look at is your cranium. All right, so again, the cranium made up of a number of flat bones, and these bones are joined together at fixed joints, and these fixed joints is called sutures. As you can see, it looks like stitches. You know, back in the days when grandma used to stitch clothes, you know, put different cloths together and stitch them, right? So you can see that's how they call it sutures, because they look like stitches, right? So that's the cranium, and the function of the cranium, as I said, a part of the function of the human skeleton is to protect your brain, right? So that's the skull. Then you have the vertebral column, which is your backbone, right? And it's made up of 33 bones is in your human vertebral column. Right? And each of these vertebrae is separated by a disc of cartilage. Right? And this is what it looks like. All right, so these are different parts of the vertebrae. There are 33 bones in all. So 7 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and then you have the coccyx. And these 33 bones more or less have similar basic structure, right? And they are stacked one on top of each other, right, with a hollow tube in the middle, and this hollow tube is where your spinal cord passes. Right? So they help to protect, one of the functions of the vertebral column is that they help to protect the spinal cord. Right? And for those who eat the turkey neck, when you get it, you can look at it. And if you look in the center, you see a hollow tube. That is your spinal cord. And the turkey neck is just basically the cervical vertebrae of the bird or the chicken neck if you eat chicken neck. Right? Those are just the cervical vertebrae. So I said there are 33. The 2 last ones, the sacral and the caudal vertebrae, what they call the coccyx, those are fused vertebrae. So the sacral is fused, made up of 5 fused bone, and the coccyx is made up of 4 fused bone. So in all we have 33. So this is what they looks like. So they are stacked on top of each other. And this is the spinal cord that runs through the center or the cavity. We're going to look at what the cavity is called later on. And in between each of the disc, or the vertebrae, there are cartilage discs between them. So we're going to compare the 3 major vertebrae because you need to know how to distinguish between the 3 major ones. So the 3 major vertebrae you have is the cervical, the thoracic, and the lumbar. And I said you need to know how to distinguish between each because questions will come They probably put a vertebrae on the question paper, asks you to distinguish which one it is, and they may ask you to justify why is it that you think that this is that vertebrae. Now the cervical vertebrae, and I forgot to mention the first two vertebrae, the cervical C1 and C2, they are unique in that the way they are shaped. The first one is called the atlas and the second is called the axis, and they allows you to shake your head and nod your head, forming the pivot joint. Right? But for the cervical, for the most part, this is what it looks like, apart from the axis and the atlas, which is the first two vertebrae. Now, I just said they all have the same basic structure. Right? So they all have a neural spine, they have a neural canal, they have a centrum, they have transverse processes. Right? It's just that the size and the appearance may look a little bit different, but the same basic structures apply for all vertebrae. Now, how do you differentiate cervical vertebrae from all the rest of other vertebrates? One thing you need to look at is these two holes at the sides of the vertebrae. Those are called the vertebral arterial canal. No other vertebrate has those two holes. And these two holes facilitate the running of the blood vessels to and from the head. They also have a very short, small neural spine. Right? And that's to facilitate the turning of the head. So their neural spine is very small compared to the rest of vertebrate. And they have two holes at the sides called the vertebral arterial canal. They also have a very large neural canal, as you can see right there. And that is to facilitate the enlarged brain stem that's formed at the back of the hinder part of the brain. So the neural canal is large, because the neural canal is where the spinal cord runs through or passes through. So the neural canal is large to facilitate the brain stem. Right? So from a look at it, vertebral arterial canal, large neural canal, and short neural spine, you know that is a cervical vertebrae. Now the next one is the thoracic vertebrae. And that is found in the thoracic region. Now the thoracic vertebrae, the distinguishing feature is that it has a very long neural spine. It has short transverse processes. I know the diagram kind of don't give it justice, but it has a very long neural spine compared to the rest. It has very short transverse processes, and that is to facilitate the rib cage, articulation with the rib cage. The neural canal is smaller compared to the cervical, and their centrum is larger than the cervical, but it is not as large as the other one that we're going to show you. Right? Now the next one is your lumbar vertebrae. So remember, thoracic vertebrae, long neural spine, short transverse processes, small neural canal. The lumbar vertebrae has long and wide neural spine. They also have long and wide transverse processes, and their centrum is very large. So they are considered to be one of the largest vertebrae in the human body because their centrum is very large, and their centrum is large because they're at the lower back, so they need to support all the weight of the body. So their centrum is what stands out in that particular vertebrae. Their vertebrae, the centrum is very large, and their neural spine and transverse processes are wide and long to facilitate the powerful back muscles that are at your lower back. All right? So cervical, large neural canal, short neural spine, vertebral arterial canal, thoracic vertebrae, long neural spine, short transverse processes, which are like the arms of the vertebrae, right? And they have a very small neural canal. The lumbar vertebrae, long and wide transverse processes, long and wide neural spine to facilitate the attachment of powerful back muscles, and they have a very large centrum, right, in order to support the weight of the body. Now we're going to look at now the appendicular skeleton. So all of that was just the axial skeleton. We're going to look at the appendicular skeleton, which arms and leg, and you have the upper arms. Upper arms where the humerus are located, lower arms, you have the radius and the ulna. Right? The upper leg, you have your femur. Right? The lower leg, you have the tibia and the fibula at the lower leg. Right? And also the lower arms, you have the carpals and the metacarpals and the phalanges. Going back to the diagram, that's why I said you need a diagram of the human skeleton. Right? So you need to know the different parts of the legs, the different parts of the arms, different muscles. So you have the phalanges, which are the tips, and you have the carpals, your hands. You have the ulna and the radius. All these are the lower arms. Upper arm, you have the humerus, and the legs. The upper leg, you have the femur, and you have the patella, which is the kneecap, and you have the tibia and fibula, which are your lower leg. And going down, you have the tarsal, metatarsals, and phalanges. Right? So I said it might be overwhelming now, but I tell you, you'll get it in time. Then a part of the appendicular skeleton is the girdles. And you have two types of girdles. You have the pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdle. The pectoral girdle are found in your shoulder, as seen on the diagram. So is a clavicle or your collarbone. You know, your collarbone, I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. When you say that you're not eating well, you say your collarbone is sore. Right? That's what I call a clavicle. That's the bone that comes right here. The common name is a collarbone, but the scientific name is a clavicle. And you have the scapula, which is your shoulder blade. And these two bones form what is called a pelvic girdle. And these attach your arms to your axial skeleton. Then you have the pelvic girdle, which is made up of the pelvis. And in females, the pelvis is wider in females than in the males. Because you know the females need that space for the carrying of the fetus or the unborn child during pregnancy, the gestation period. Right? So they have a wider pelvis than males do. Right? So that's the pelvic girdle. Now the structure of the bones, you need to know about the external and internal structure of the bones. Because you know the bones is a major part of the skeleton. The skeleton is made up of bones and cartilage. The bones is made up of deposit minerals, mainly calcium, and collagen fiber. Now the minerals give bones its hardness, right? So you know you get a raw bone, kind of hard to break. But collagen gives it some form of flexibility. If your bone was just rigid, it would break easily. But there's some form of elasticity within your bone. It's not much, but it is there, and so it prevents the bone from not breaking easily. There's an experiment that you might have done where you extract the calcium from the bone, and after the calcium has been extracted, you realize that the bone is now flexible. That is because when you put it in acid, and you can do it at home with vinegar. So you get a raw chicken bone, put it in some vinegar, leave for a couple of days, and after you take it out, you realize that the bone is now flexible. You can bend it, twist it any way you want, because what happens is the vinegar will displace the calcium, leaving behind the collagen fibers. Right? So the bone is now flexible, because the collagen fiber is what gives the bone its flexibility, and the minerals like calcium gives it that rigidness. So the bone is made up of the epiphysis, which is top part, and lower part. These are the growing parts of bone. The epiphysis disc, consists of the growing parts of the bone. So at both ends of the bone, you have the epiphysis, that's the growing part of the bone. And then in the middle, you have the diaphysis, which consists of your compact bone, which is a hard part of the bone. At the epiphysis, you have the spongy bone, and that kind of helps to lower the density of bone. Without the spongy bone, then your bone will be quite heavy, right? And so it makes movement a little bit difficult. That's why birds have a lot of spaces in their bone, so that it reduces the weight of the bone. And in the middle now you have marrow. You have red and yellow marrow in the bone. That's in the middle. And the red marrow is for production of blood cells, and the yellow marrow is for storage of fats. All right, so the same diagram is showing here, but just up close. So the epiphysis, growing parts of the bone. All right, and then in the middle, you have diaphysis, which made up of compact bone, hard part of the bone. And in the bone now, you have the yellow marrow and the red marrow. So the red marrow for production of blood cells, yellow marrow for storage of fat. So bone is actually a living tissue. Right? So it may also sometimes, well, if you notice bones, you also have a small hole where blood vessels actually enter the bone. Because bone is living, so it needs nutrients, oxygen, so forth, and it also need to remove waste product as well. So bone is a living tissue. Now for movement to occur in the human skeleton, there must be joints. And joint is simple where two or more bones meet. That's just a basic definition for joints. Different types of joints in the human skeleton. You have the fibrous joints, and these are called immovable joints, so they're not movable at all. Like in the cranium, where the sutures in the cranium, those are called fibrous joints, so they are fixed joints. Right? Then you have cartilaginous joints, and these are what is found in your vertebrae. Right? So they involve, or they permit small amount of movement. Right? So they are partially movable joints. Then you have the synovial joints, which are the more dominant joints in your human skeleton. Right? And between them you have the synovial fluid. That's what they call synovial joint. And the synovial fluid serves as lubricant, so it helps the joints to move freely. For your syllabus, you need to know, able to draw and label a typical synovial joint. So you need to know all the different parts and their function. So between where the bones meet, you have the cartilage, and the cartilage serves to reduce friction between the bones. And then you have the synovial fluid that runs in the space. And the synovial fluid, as I said, is like a lubricant to reduce friction as well. And then one bone is connected to the other bone at the joint by ligaments. So ligaments attach bone to bone. Right? And then you have a synovial membrane, which secrete the synovial fluid. So this you need to know, be able to label and draw on an exam paper. So in addition to have a diagram of the human skeleton, you also need to have a diagram of a typical synovial joint, well labeled and annotated, so that you can know the functions of the different parts of the synovial joint. This diagram will show you different types of synovial joints that are there, but your syllabus basically function on two types, the hinge joint and the ball and socket joints. Right? So these joints have synovial fluid, they are fully movable, right? And they involve the hinge joints and the ball and socket, but there are more synovial joints in the body, but you just focus on those two. So the ball and socket, basically as the name suggests, the head of one bone does fit into the round depression in the other bone, called a round depression is called a acetabellum. Right? So the head fits into it, and so you have a wide range of movement. You have a 360 degrees movement with a ball and socket joint. The disadvantage, however, is that it dislocates very easily. The hinge joint, like hinges on a door, right? So it just gets movement in one plane, right? And these are found at the knee and the elbow, right? Movement in one plane. And the advantage is that they allow you to be able to lift weights without dislocating easily, right? Now the movement of limbs is important, and the movement of limb is facilitated by joints and muscles. And it takes two muscles to move a joint, because a muscle only exerts force or produce force when contracted. When lengthened, no force is produced during a muscle. Right? So for those of you who do physics, you know movement about a fulcrum. So the joint is basically a fulcrum, and the muscle is what produces the effort for the movement along the fulcrum. And we're going to tell you the different muscles that involve in movement of your forearm. All right, so this is the forearm, and we're going to describe how movement occurs in your forearm. All right, and I don't want to display it too much because, my huge bicep might tear my shirt. But for you to flex your arm, what happens is that you have the bicep and the tricep, and these are called antagonistic muscles, meaning that they work against each other. So in moving the arm, again, I said there are two muscles that are needed to move your arm because of the nature of muscles. They only produce force when contracted. So of course, you need another muscles at the back to facilitate movement up and down. So for you to flex your arm, all right, what happens is that your bicep on top will contract, and you're going to pull on the ulna, all right, and so your ulna goes up. At the same time, your tricep, which is found at the back of your humerus, is now going to relax. So when one muscle contracts, the other one will relax. All right? So the bicep would be your agonist or your contracted muscle, and the tricep now will be your antagonist, which is the muscle that is doing the opposite to the bicep. So the bicep contract, pull on the ulna, your arm, pull on the radius, pull on the radius on the ulna, all right? And the arm comes up, and your tricep relaxes. If you're going to extend your arm, the opposite happens. The bicep now is going to relax, and your triceps are going to contract, and your arm is straightened. All right? So lifting your arms, bicep contract, tricep relax, your arms come up. To extend, your tricep will contract, and your bicep relax. So antagonistic muscles, all right? Biceps and the tricep. Same thing for your leg. All right? For you to extend the knee, what happens? Your quadriceps will contract and your hamstring will relax. For you to come back in the knee, hamstring contract, quadriceps relax. So two muscles work at a joint to bring about movement, and they're called antagonistic muscles because they tend to work against each other. All right, now supporting animals. So the skeleton alone can give about support in animals. As I said, there need to be muscles as well. So the two systems is in movement and support. Right? So we're going to look at the type of muscles because they are such important for the body as well. So different types of muscles. You have the cardiac muscles found in your heart. These muscles work 24/7 without getting tired. I would say they don't get fatigue. Right? You have skeletal muscles. These are the ones that are attached to your skeleton, and these are the ones that brings about movement and support. They fatigue easily. Right? And then you have smooth muscles. These are the ones that are found within major organs of the body, along the digestive tract. Right? And they're the cardiac and the smooth muscles. Both of them are involuntary muscles, mean they are not under our conscious thoughts. Right? Where skeletal muscles is voluntary. Right? You contract and relax them at will. Now these muscles are connected to your bones via tendons. Later on, when we look earlier, when we're looking at joints, we mentioned ligaments. So ligaments connect bone to bone. Tendons connect muscles to bone. You need to know the difference between those two. So ligaments, bone to bone, and they are elastic. Right? They can stretch. Ligaments can stretch. But tendons are non-elastic, and they attach muscles to bone. That's why you can tear a tendon very easily because they are non-elastic. They do not stretch. So athletes sometimes have problem tearing their tendons. All right. So muscles bring support because they act on both sides of the bones and so help to bring about balance when the muscles are attached on either side of the bones. Without that, then, of course, you would have the skeleton will actually collapse if there are no muscles at all. And what you have is, even though you have big, strong skeleton, all you have is just a pile of mess. If there was no muscles attached to your skeleton, the skeleton could not be supported without the aid of muscles on either side of the bones, keeping them upright. Now that we look at animals, movement and support in animals, plants also need support as well. They do not undergo locomotion, right? But they're involved in movement, but they too need to be supported, so they need to be erected, right? Coming from the soil. And how are plants supported? Right? Plants are supported by two means, physiological means and structural. So they have two types of support. So they have physiological support and structural support. And what do I mean by this? Physiological support has to do with the cells and the osmosis, right? So later on, well, not later, or earlier in grade 10, you did transport of substances in and out of cell, and we look at osmosis and diffusion and all of that, and we see how water move in and out of cells, right? So the turgidity is one way how plant offer support, and that is by physiological means. And I said that is not permanent. Right? The permanent is structural, which is due to lignin deposit within the cell wall. So plant support, physiological means by turgidity of cells, and also structurally by lignin deposit in cells. So the turgidity, as I said, it's not permanent, right? So the plant may look like this because there's a fresh supply, a lot of supply of water in the soil. So as water moves into the cells, it increases the osmotic pressure within the cells, and so the cells become turgid. And as they become turgid, they help to support the plant. But as I said, this is not permanent because if not much water is in the soil, then what happens is that water is going to move out of the soil, move out of the cells in the plant, right, into the xylem, and that will result in the cell becoming flaccid. Right? So the cell is going to lose osmotic pressure, and so it will not be firm as it should, and so the plant will lose some form of support. And this is in like herbaceous plant, non-woody plants. Right? The next form of support is permanent, and this is due to lignin deposit that is found within the cell. For example, the xylem is thickened with lignin. Right? Over a period of time, this forms the wood in plant, and so this helps to bring some form of structural support to plant. So I hope you have learned a lot. Until next time, I am Jerome Wright.